Hello and welcome to this week's Microfile, which gives you a chance to see again some of the best items from the Micro Live series. This week we look at computing in the home. The years 1983 to 84 were boom times for the home micro manufacturer. Over 2 million of us bought a machine determined to put it to good use in the home and sure that we'd be learning to program it ourselves before long. Well, times have changed, the frantic boom is over and many good manufacturers are no longer with us. But don't let those micros gather dust in the corner. Have a look at some good ways of putting them to good use. Most home micros start out by using cassette for storing and loading programs. Well, cassette tapes are cheap and readily available. The trouble is they're very slow. You see, cassettes were never designed for storing computer data. They were originally intended for taping dictation. So cassettes are a compromise. And that's why more and more home micros are now being offered with discs, because apart from being faster, they offer all kinds of other facilities. Here's the very popular Amstrad, and this is the disk drive unit itself here, and inside, there's the disc. Now, discs come in other sizes than that. That's a 3-inch, here we've got a 3.5, this is 5 1/4, and here you see why they're called floppy disks, and this one, an 8-inch, which nobody seems to use these days. So what do discs offer? Well, for one thing, every disc has a built-in catalogue or directory of all the programs stored on it. So all I need to do is type in *cat, and there we are. I get a complete list of all the programs on the disc. Now, you could do the same thing with a 60-minute tape, but of course it'll take you 60 minutes. Now then, that's the program I want. It's called Graphic, so I just type in load. Graphic. I'm not the world's best typist, but that's all there is to it. It's ready to run. How does that work? Well, inside the sleeve is, logically enough, a disk. Now, if I get rid of that sleeve, the disk itself is organised into tracks, going round, and sectors, radiating out. When I load a program from the disk, it starts spinning. There's a read-write head, which is actually part of the disk drive, which moves in to read the directory. Now, on this disk, the directory is stored on the edge, and there the head finds where the program is. That is, it finds the track and sector number of the start of the program. It then moves in and starts to load up. Well, it sounds complicated, but all you need to know is type in load, and the rest is done very, very quickly. But disk also gives other advantages too. For instance, you can delete files, you can copy them, rename them, all very, very simply. Well, so far, so good. We've seen how this particular micro uses this particular type of 5 1/4-inch disc. But like everything in this business, it's every man for himself. As we've seen, there are other sizes, but the problem is more subtle than that. You see, there are many different ways of using this same size disc. When you buy a disc, it's got no information on it. It's just like a blank sheet of paper. So the first thing you have to do is format those tracks and sectors onto it. Well, that's very much like ruling lines on the sheet of paper. How many lines? Well, that depends on your system. Many systems use 40 track, but obviously you'll get more information packed in if you use 80 track. Of course, if you can write on both sides of the disk, you'll get even more information in. But of course, that needs 2 heads, one underneath, so that'll cost you. Now, that's called a double-sided disk, which is not to be confused with double density. Double density means packing the data in tighter, writing in smaller print on that piece of paper, if you like. So, out of that little lot, which one do you choose? Well, as often as not, the choice is made for you. There's absolutely no point in buying an 80-track drive if all the commercial software you want to run is supplied on 40-track. So it's worth finding out what's the standard for your system. And just about every home micro there is lets you upgrade to disk. Even the Spectrum here, with its micro drives, has attracted floppy disk interfaces. This one here is called the Beta Plus, and it costs about £95. It hooks your Spectrum up to a disk drive, which itself will cost another £100 or so. Well, most games cassettes take about 4 or 5 minutes to load. In fact, that one over there, Attic Attack, is still loading. But with this disk interface, it's as quick as this. Just enter a few commands, press the enter button, and Bob's your uncle. Once you're hooked on the speed of disks, you'll never want to use cassettes again. And of course, what you'll then want to do is put all your cassettes onto disk. But that might not be so easy. You see, there are 2 main problems. The first is that all disk systems grab some memory for their own use, so your programs have less room to run in, and it might not be enough. The second problem is that a lot of your commercial software is copy protected. So unless you really know what you're doing, you're not going to be able to transfer it. You'll need to trade in all those old cassettes for disc versions, if they're available. Most software houses we've spoken to will make that swap for about half the price of the disc version. But that could prove expensive. And of course, if you've got a Spectrum, there won't be a disc version to swap to. The system we've got here gets around that problem by taking what's called a snapshot of the entire contents of memory and saving that onto disk. If I just press this button here, it saves everything. It dumps the entire memory, not just the screen, but the whole program. Now, that's a very, very neat system, very easy to use. But software houses don't like it. They think it's a pirate's dream. Although, of course, making a single backup copy of your own software for your own use shouldn't cause any problems. None of the copy protection mechanisms that the software houses have come up with can defeat a system like that. Well, not this week, anyway. Once you've invested in a disk drive, you'll wonder how you ever managed without, especially if you're using your computer to keep track of large amounts of information.
How many kinds of sweet flowers grow in an English country garden? I'll tell you now of some that I know, and those I miss you'll surely pardon.
There are 3,000 types of plants in this Hertfordshire garden centre, every one of them unique. They all bloom at different times, can grow to amazing heights, and some need specialist care. Choosing the plant that's just right for your garden can be a very real problem. There are so many variables: colour, season, height and price. And assuming you get that right, will the plant actually grow in your garden with its variables of soil type, drainage and position? Say you're looking for a plant with red flowers which blooms in autumn, grows to no more than 3 feet, is happy in the shade and doesn't demand all your attention. How on earth do you find such a plant? Well, you could consult an expert, but just when you want them, experts always seem to have their hands full. Alternatively, there are plenty of gardening books. But imagine how long it would take to leaf through all these volumes trying to root out exactly the right plant. It would take forever. This is the answer: a computerized database, an electronic catalogue of all the plants stored on a computer. The information is stored in a kind of electronic card index. Each plant has its own record, similar to a card, and on that record are details of its characteristics. Here's a new record, and it's being filled in just the same way as a new card is created. Each item or characteristic on the card is known as a field. But how does all this technology help you find that elusive plant, the one that matches precisely what you want and your garden can support?
Oh, yes, I do hope you can. I'm looking for a plant to fill in a gap in my garden.
What sort of thing was it you were looking for?
Well, something that doesn't cause me a lot of trouble.
Like a shrub?
A shrub would be fine, yes.
Right, well, if you'd like, we can go through on the computer and maybe print you out a list.
Yes, please, that would be very helpful.
After the plant's details are fed into the computer, the system takes into account your garden as well.
Right, that's the, we've got the plant sorted out. Now the garden. What's the position it's going to be planted in, like?
Well, it's going to just be in part shade and part sun.
Is it exposed? Normal?
Not very exposed. There is a wall around the garden.
It's quite normal in between.
Yes, yes.
And is it sunny, shady?
Well, no, it gets some sun and it's in the shade some of the day as well, so it's
semi.
a bit of both.
All right, we'll put this through the computer. We should come out with a list.
Thank you very much.
The computer now has all the information it needs to start a thorough search of every plant, looking for an exact match. In this case, it's found half a dozen plants which fit the bill precisely. Armed with a printed list, the customer can then go off and see which plant she likes.
There we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In fact, because the computer is so thorough, searching every record for a match, it will probably come up with a few suggestions that even the experts might have forgotten.
Well, if you're running a small business or perhaps a club or society, you have to keep track of a lot of information. The traditional way to manage this data uses reams of paper and a filing system to keep it all under control. At its simplest, a database is organised rather like a card filing system. This is a file of 154 flowers that we held in alphabetic order. And each card is a record, and the name, the Latin name, colour, height and so on are fields in that record. Now, if I want the details of one flower, say goat's beard, it's fairly easy. They're in alphabetic order, and I can quickly go through them like that, flipping through, looking for the name, and there it is, goat's beard, Aruncus sylvester, yellow, 200 and so on. But if I want all the yellow flowers over 1 metre high, then it's much more difficult. I've got to read every card, one after the other, from beginning to end, to sort out the yellow flowers over 1 metre high. It's a very laborious job and very boring. Fred?
Well, let's try to do the same thing on a simple computer database, the sort available for most home micros. First of all, I need to create that file. Well, here we are, create a file, that's option 1 here. Pop that in. Now, before I can enter any details of those plants, I must describe how each record will be organised. I've got to make a template, in other words, the equivalent of this blank card. This just shows the fields, the plant name, Latin name, colour and so on. Right, well, the computer's going to help me do all this. It's called initialising. It says, how many fields will each record need? Well, the card has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, so I enter 6. Then field number 1, what name is to be used to identify this field? Maximum 7 characters. Now, that's the first problem. I'm limited to 7 letters. Well, here we've got plant name on the card, but I'll just have to settle for plant, I suppose. Plant. And what is the maximum number of characters that it will need? Between 2 and 240. Now, that's the field length. The problem here, you see, is memory. All my data is going to be stored on a disk, and if I choose 240 characters, I'll soon run out of space. Well, I know that 35 letters will be long enough for a plant name, so I'll pop that in. And then it comes on to field number 2. What name is to be used for that? Well, it did say Latin name, but I'll settle for Latin, and so on. Well, you can see that this will take a few minutes. And once I've set up this template, that's when the real donkey work starts, filling in all the details for 150-odd plants. But fortunately, one of our stalwart backroom boys has done all that for me. So I can just move deftly to this other machine and say, here's one I started earlier. Now, you can see here that this is the 154th record, and putting in all those details took a couple of evenings, so it's quite a slog. There's still just a few fields to complete here. The soil, I know, must be fertile, and aspect should be sunny for this particular plant. And there it is, the database is now complete. So now I can do some useful things with it. For example, I can flick through the pages easily enough, but that's no great shakes. But I could get the machine to resort those records according to size or the soil type if I wanted. Anyway, let's solve Mac's problem. I want to find a tall yellow flower. So I want to search through this file. Now, my crib card here tells me that a search is this key, F2, press that. Now I've got to put in the particulars of what I want. Well, I don't care what the plant is called, and I certainly don't care about the Latin name. The colour I do mind about, that's got to be yellow. And the height, well, that's got to be tall, let's say over 100 centimetres. Well, that's the sign for greater than 100. Soil and aspect, oh, well, let's say I don't care about those. OK, and off it goes. Now, this will take nearly a minute, and that might come as a bit of a surprise. But you see, the computer is looking at every record like this. It's going through saying, there's a yellow one, but it's not tall enough. OK, well, here's a tall one, but it's not yellow. Oh, here's one that's both tall and yellow. And then it earmarks that. But, of course, to do that, it has to examine all 154. OK, but why is it taking so long? Well, this particular micro has a very limited memory for that kind of work. All the time it's pulling data in and out from the disk here, and that's what's taking the time. Now, in fact, although that's not ideal for its studio demonstration, it's no great problem, really. You can always pop and make a cup of tea. Anyway, that should be nearly up now. I timed this out earlier today, and it was 46 seconds. Yes, there we are. And the records found are 6. There are 6 plants in the database that might be suitable. Let's see what they are. The first one is goat's beard, as we suspected, yellow, 200 centimetres tall. The next one is, what, sunflower, also yellow, also 200 centimetres tall. So you see, it may be a simple system, but it can have practical uses. It's very cheap, it's easy to use, and it's flexible. So a home database like this would probably be up to cataloguing, say, your stamp or your record collection. The drawback is it's slow. You could end up drinking an awful lot of tea.
With real business applications, speed is more important. Files are going to be bigger and much more complex. Business machines now use 16 or even 32-bit processors, with at least 500,000 characters of internal memory, so they can pull in more data at a time, usually from a 10 or 20 megabyte hard disk. The programs tend to be better written, probably in machine code for speed, and they can cost several £100s. Well, this is a 16-bit Nimbus machine, which is going to look through the same 154 records and extract yellow flowers over 1 metre high, and it's really quite rapid. Here we go. Already we've got goat's beard, there it is, and 154 records, so 6 records, so it's very, very fast. Just about time for a sip of Fred's tea.
Well, that was only a small database. The Nimbus could quite easily cope with many files of thousands of records. But of course, whatever your micro, the bigger your database, the longer it will take to sort. Larger databases that needed to be sorted through quickly are kept on mainframe computers. Well, take travel agents, for instance. There's so much information on holidays available that, at the moment, the only practical way to store it and keep it up to date is on a central mainframe computer. Users can link to the mainframe via a desk micro and a phone line. And you too can dial up other computers with your home micro if you have one of these. It's a modulator-demodulator, or modem for short. But I'm afraid the whole exercise is still riddled with unnecessary jargon and with software that doesn't always behave on cue, as Leslie found out.
I have had a few problems of my own this week with baud rates, stop and start bits, parity settings. I've been trying to communicate with my home micro. I did have a margin of success. I managed to send and receive messages in a mailbox on Telecom Gold. That was actually thanks to a simple piece of software written by John Cole. Oh. But I still haven't managed to get into our own bulletin board, John. More of that later.
Yes.
You seem to be having a simple time of it with this setup.
Right,
what is
this
it?
is a nice piece of software. It's really great. The great advantage is that when you buy the software, it comes with all the information in that you need. For example, you can select the service you want, EasyLink, One-to-One, Prestel, Telecom Gold, whatever, and all you do is select that and then dial. And the system knows automatically, well, it would do if it was working properly, the system knows automatically that, we'll go over to the other port, come on machine, that way, and
try and tell me what it should be doing anyway.
Right.
Oh, it's done it.
It's going to dial, I hope.
So you don't have to pick up the phone and actually dial for yourself?
That's right. It's got the numbers in it. It's also got the baud rates, the start and stop bits, and everything else. So it's just ready to go, theoretically.
No setting up at all.
That's the idea.
Theoretically, as you say.
Yes,
and the services, all the commercial services and bulletin boards and everything as well.
That's right. You can do all those different things. Bulletin boards, electronic mail, Prestel, conferencing systems.
Yeah. What's conferencing, by the way?
Oh, that's something quite exciting. It's a way of bringing together a whole group of people who've got a common interest and sharing messages between them.
Via a computer.
Via a computer. But what's so interesting is that the people who are using it have ceased to be dominated by the technicalities of the computer, and they're starting to use the system for real as a communications medium. In fact, I know one very large company who are finding it so effective and such a commercial advantage that they actually want to keep it a secret that they're using conferencing systems so the competition don't find out. I mean, that's quite an indicator that it's powerful.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear people praising what the system does rather than how it does it. I must admit, I want one.
Yes.
What is it, by the way?
So do I.
Vicom.
It's called Vicom.
Yeah.
First-rate software. £172 for the software, £300 for the modem, so the whole setup at the moment is quite expensive.
Yeah.
And in fact, you're far more likely to have something like this at home at the moment.
Now, that modem, let me have a look.
Do you recognise that? Is that the one
vaguely.
at home?
No, mine was a single rate, 1275 baud rate. Smaller than that.
Close. This is a more flexible thing.
Right.
The purpose of the modem is to take the signals from the computer and convert them in a form that can travel down the phone lines. For example, if you want to get anything down the phone line, you have to convert it to an audio tone like
something you can
those
hear.
two tones for 0 and 1. We've got a graphic. If we show you that, you'll see what I mean. Every character is built up of a set of tones in a certain order. And a different character, if we put B up next, we see a different set of orders for the two tones going down the line. So the modem just takes the computer signals, push them down the line's audio tones.
So it just translates?
That's right.
One form of signal into another?
One of the interesting things is that you may have noticed that when data goes down, it takes a little while to come back up on the screen. And that's because, if we look at the next graphic, you'll see the computer when you push a key, the data goes all the way down to the distant computer and then comes back and appears on the screen. So it's actually got to traverse quite a long route before it makes it to the screen.
But when it does appear on the screen, that verifies that it's got all the way to its destination and come back again.
Right.
That explains that. In fact, that explains the basics of a modem, I suppose.
Yes, the modem's quite straightforward in a way.
Reasonably simple. But when it comes to the software, communication software can be very tricky indeed.
Yes.
What have we got up here? Communicator. Now, this is fine if you want to communicate to through Telecom Gold, because that's what it's set up for.
Right, it's set up for that.
But if you want to change the parameters, I think you call it, look what you're faced with. I mean, a checklist as long as 3 arms.
It really is a bit intimidating, isn't it?
And is all that necessary?
No, it isn't.
I mean, what do you need to know after that?
OK, well, one of the most important things you need to change is the baud rate. That's set for 1200 baud. That means 1200 bits per second that's going down the line. Each character requires 10 bits. So you can send 120 characters per second down the line.
Yeah.
Now, the computer at the other end has to be set up at the same baud rate so that it can receive 120 characters per second.
So, you mean you have to set your computer up to match the computer at the other end?
Exactly so.
Right.
Now, if, for example, you want to talk to a bulletin board, it's pretty likely that the bulletin board's going to be working on 300 baud. So we can just change that down to 300, go down to the transmit baud rate and change that up to 300.
That now explains why I couldn't get through to the bulletin board last night with my single-rate modem.
Oh, I see.
1275.
Right, yes.
Thank you very much for explaining that to me.
OK.
Right. How many baud rates are there?
Oh, there are lots and lots, but there are two main ones. 300 baud for the bulletin boards, and as far as commercial services are concerned, there's a whole range, but pretty common is 1200 baud receive and 75 baud transmit. You can get into most systems with that. So those are the two that it would be sensible to go for. You'll cover yourself both ways.
And in fact, that's what you should go for if you haven't bought any equipment and you want to communicate.
Yes.
If you think there's any likelihood of going for a bulletin board, make sure you've got a dual...
Buy a dual standard modem so you can cope with both.
Right.
The software will always cope with both anyway.
What else have we got on this list?
Well,
what's parity and parity checking and all that?
We could pick almost any of these parameters and talk about them, but let me just talk about parity. This is a beautiful hangover from the days of paper tape, punch paper tape. 7 bits are needed for the character. Now, if the paper tape got a tear in it, you might get an extra hole. So they added an extra row of holes called parity. Let's have a look at another graphic and I can explain that better with that. Right, there are 7 bits marked under the character and the parity bit. At the moment, for the character A, they're just 2 bits at a 1. If we look at the character B, different combination, just 2 bits. And character C, OK, now this time you'll see there are 3 ones within the character and the parity bit is on.
Yes.
A total of 4 bits, again an even number. And that's called even parity. You set the parity bit to make up an even number of ones in the 8 bits that you're going to send.
You say you set, but in fact you don't really have to set it, do you?
Well,
if it's now accepted that everyone sets it even.
Well, everybody uses even parity apart from the bulletin boards. And since anyway, if you get an error, there's not much you can do about it, most systems, like this one, for example, say parity checking off.
Yeah.
In other words, well, forget it. And that covers every possibility.
So
Let's just ignore
I think the
problem.
message I'm getting from you is that the software writers have actually given us too many options, and all we really need to think about is the baud rate at this stage.
Yes, luckily things are shaking down and we've got so few options. We can simplify things a lot and just turn up some really simple software, which is very easy to use.
If the day ever comes we end up with something as simple as Vicom and cheap enough for everyone to afford, then communications, I think, will really take off.
That's the way.
Thanks very much, John.
And remember, the Micro Live bulletin board can be contacted if you've got a 300 modem on 01 579 2288. Well, of course, there are other ways of putting your home micro to good use. And Micro Live will be looking at a couple of these in particular in the new series. Spreadsheets. Are they so complicated you have to be an accountant to use them? And word processors. Try them once and you'll never look back. But that's all for now. Next week, Leslie takes a look at the short history of computing. Goodbye.